3:47 a.m. in Angus, Scotland. 300 rooms in complete silence. Walls 5 meters thick that hold 9 centuries of secrets. A bricked-up door that architectural plans never show. A monster confined for generations in a hidden chamber. Kings who refuse to stay more than a single night. 11 rooms permanently sealed after 1486. Birth records erased from all official archives. The British royal family avoiding one specific room for 600 years. The Lyon family has guarded a secret at Glamis Castle for 14 generations, and those who discover it never reveal what they saw. Is it protection of family honor or physical evidence of something that should never have existed? This is the story of Glamis Castle, not the version you'll find in tourist brochures, not the romantic narrative of the Queen Mother's childhood. This is the story the Scottish aristocracy has tried to bury for 600 years, emerging only in fragments, forgotten documents in dusty archives, testimonies from disturbed visitors, architectural measurements that simply don't add up. The castle stands 12 miles north of Dundee, in the Scottish Highlands. From a distance, it is exactly what you'd expect. Gothic towers, grey stone walls, meticulously maintained gardens. 30,000 tourists visit each year. They tour 12 main rooms in 50-minute visits. They admire 17th century Flemish tapestries. They hear anecdotes about the young Elizabeth Bowes lion playing in these same corridors. But no one shows them the West Wing. No one explains why. If you count the windows from outside the castle, there are 24 that correspond to no room on the official floor plans. No one mentions that every male heir of the Lyon family upon turning 21 is taken to a specific room where a family secret is revealed, and that since 1486, none has ever spoken about what he saw. In 1869, a group of aristocratic guests decided to solve the mystery. They hung white towels from every castle window they could access. The next day, they walked the perimeter and counted. 24 windows had no towels. When they confronted the Earl of Strathmore, they were all expelled from the castle before nightfall. One of them later wrote in his memoirs, "The Earl turned so pale that I thought he might collapse." Whatever those windows conceal is worth more than his social reputation. This is a castle valued at £30 million sterling, with 300 documented rooms, with 900 years of continuous history, with direct connections to the British royal family, and yet there are spaces within its walls that do not exist on paper. There are rooms that receive heat but are acknowledged by no blueprint. There is a family tradition that has survived wars, revolutions, and the decline of the British aristocracy. Absolute silence about what is hidden in Glamis Castle. The question is not whether a secret exists. The question is why, after 6 centuries, protecting it remains more important than any rational explanation that could be offered. This is what we know. This is what the Lyon family has allowed to be known. And this is what historical documents reveal when no one is paying attention. In 1372, Sir John Lyon received a gift from King Robert II of Scotland. It was not a ceremonial title. It was not an honorary medal. It was land. Land in Angus, in the heart of the Scottish Highlands. And with that land came a structure that had already witnessed 300 years of history, a castle built on 11th century foundations. Sir John Lyon was no ordinary nobleman. He was the royal chamberlain, one of the men closest to the king. The kind of man trusted not only with money, but with secrets. The kind of man who understood that some things are never written into official documents. When he received Glamis, the castle was essentially a fortified tower, walls 5 meters thick, spiral stone staircases designed to hinder attackers, narrow windows that served more as arrow slits than sources of light. It was not a home, it was a fortress. But Sir John had plans. Over the next 50 years, the Lyon family would transform this military tower into something far more complex. They added wings, built rooms, expanded upward and outward, and at some point in that process they began constructing spaces that would never appear in any official record. Historical records from the 14th century are fragmentary, but we know this. In 1372, Glamis had roughly 15 rooms. By 1450, it had more than 100. The growth was exponential, almost obsessive. The Lyon family was not building to host guests. They were building to contain something. The castle appears in the writings of William Shakespeare. In Macbeth, it is here that King Duncan is murdered. Shakespeare, writing in 1606, chose Glamis deliberately, not for its architectural beauty, not for its military importance, but for its reputation. By the 16th century, Glamis Castle was already known as a place where dark things happened. Location matters. 12 miles north of Dundee, yet isolated enough that whatever occurred within its walls could remain private. The Scottish Highlands of the 14th century were nothing like today. There were no tourists, no paved roads. If you wanted to keep a secret, you built thick walls and ensured that only the right people had access. In 1445, the Lyon family received the title Lord Glamis. By then, the castle was no longer just property, it was a legacy. And with that legacy came a responsibility, passed down from generation to generation, to protect what existed within those walls. Documents from the 15th century are more detailed. We know that in 1456, Sir John Lyon, the fourth Lord Glamis, spent an extraordinary sum on renovations. The records mention works in the north wing and construction of private chambers, but they do not specify how many chambers nor their purpose. What we do know is that in 1456, the castle had approximately 120 documented rooms. In 1486, 30 years later, the official plans showed only 109. 11 rooms vanished from the records. They were not demolished. The exterior walls of the castle show that the physical structure did not change significantly between those dates. The rooms did not disappear, they simply ceased to exist on paper. 1486 is the crucial year. It is the year something happened at Glamis Castle that changed the nature of the Lyon family forever. Parish records from the Glamis Chapel reveal a fascinating anomaly. Between 1486 and 1489, there are no birth records for the Lyon family. 3 full years. In an era when aristocratic families averaged 1 child every 2 years, 3 years of absolute silence is statistically improbable. It was not that the family had no children during those years, it was that those births were never officially recorded. When the records resume in 1490, there is a peculiar note from the parish priest: restoration of parish books after water damage. A convenient explanation for missing pages, except that death, marriage and baptism records for other families in the region remain intact for those same years. Only Lyon births disappeared. In 1490, a family portrait appears. It was commissioned by the 5th Lord Glamis and hung in the Great Hall. The painting depicts the Lyon family, the Lord, his wife and their children. Originally, the portrait showed 6 figures. We know this because in 1923, during a restoration cleaning, it was discovered that the painting had been altered. The 6th figure had been painted over with pigment matching the background. It was not removed, it was deliberately erased. Who was the 6th person? Family records do not say, but the placement of the erased figure is revealing. Positioned at the rear left, partially hidden behind a curtain, as if, even in the original portrait, there was something to conceal. During this period, the Lyon family established a tradition that continues to this day. The eldest male heir, upon turning 21, is taken to a specific room in the castle. There his father, or the castle steward, reveals a family secret. After that revelation, the young man becomes one of only 3 living custodians of the secret: the current Lord Glamis, his adult heir, and the castle steward. The tradition began after 1486. It is specific, ritualized, and absolutely inviolable. In 600 years, no heir has ever broken the silence. 15th century documents also reveal changes in the castle's service structure. Before 1486, Glamis employed approximately 15 permanent servants. After 1486, that number rose to 25, with one peculiarity: 5 of those servants were assigned exclusively to the north wing and were required to swear a vow of silence as a condition of employment. Not a standard confidentiality agreement, a religious vow, administered by the priest of the Glamis Chapel, with excommunication as the penalty for violation. What required that level of secrecy in an era when aristocratic privacy was already absolute? In 1486, the architectural plans were redrawn. We know this because 2 versions exist. One dated 1480 and another from 1487 version shows fewer rooms, yet the external structure of the castle is identical. The 11 rooms were not demolished, they were erased on paper. A modern architect who studied both plans in 1978 calculated that approximately 150 square meters of space were missing from the west wing, space that exists physically, but does not appear on any official plan after 1487. The Lyon family was not hiding a single small room, they were hiding an entire section of the castle. During the 15th century, medical and social practices regarding children with severe deformities were brutal, but well documented. Children born with visible disabilities rarely survived beyond infancy, not for medical reasons, but by family decision. The church permitted passive abandonment, essentially allowing a child to die through neglect without active intervention. But the Lyon family was deeply Catholic. Passive abandonment was technically permissible. Active killing was an unforgivable mortal sin. What does a devout Catholic aristocratic family do with an heir born with deformities so severe that he cannot be presented to society, but who cannot be killed without damning their immortal souls? You build a room that does not exist on any official plan, you assign servants who swear religious silence, and you keep alive what society expects to die. In 1490, 4 years after the mysterious event of 1486, the castle's provisioning expenses increased by 15%, not due to an increase in guests, not because of a celebration. The increase was constant, monthly, predictable, as if they were feeding someone who did not exist in the official records. This provisioning pattern would continue, with minor variations for the next 250 years. The legend is told in whispers, not on official tours, not in history books approved by the family, but in the pubs of Glamis village, in conversations among families who have lived in the castle's shadow for generations. The story endures. On the night of October 21st, 1486, Lady Elizabeth Lyon gave birth. The labour was difficult. Midwives were summoned from Dundee, but so was a physician from Edinburgh. Unusual for the time, as childbirth was typically handled only by women. The presence of a doctor suggested anticipated complications. The child was born alive, but what emerged was not what anyone expected. According to local legend, collected by folklorists in 1890, the child had severe deformities, a barrel-shaped body, atrophied arms and legs, no visible neck. The head appeared to grow directly from the shoulders, and the eyes, accounts are consistent on this detail. The eyes were fully functional, alert, intelligent. The family faced an impossible dilemma. The child was the firstborn son, under 15th century Scottish succession law that made him the legitimate heir to everything, the title, the lands, the Leon fortune. But his appearance made it impossible to present him to society. No aristocratic family would accept a marriage. No court would receive him. His very existence would be a social disgrace capable of destroying the family's status. But killing him would be murder. And for a devout Catholic family, murder meant eternal damnation. The solution was brutal in its pragmatism. The child was officially declared dead at birth. The parish records, if they ever existed, vanished, and the child was taken to a specific section of the castle that had been prepared in advance. Not a dungeon, not a cold, dark cell. Testimonies from servants who supposedly worked in that section describe something different. A suite of rooms, furnished, with a fireplace, with windows overlooking an inner courtyard no one else could see. A prison, yes, but a prison built with as much comfort as the family could justify before God. The child was not abandoned to die. He was kept alive, and according to the legend, he lived far longer than anyone anticipated. Local testimonies collected between 1850 and 1920 are strikingly consistent in specific details. Castle servants spoke of screams coming from the north wing on certain nights, not screams of pain, screams of frustration, of rage, sounds that were not entirely human yet could not be mistaken for animals. In 1640, a visitor named Thomas Busby recorded a disturbing experience in his diary. He was staying in a room in the east wing when, near midnight, he heard a heavy dragging and laboured breathing in the outer corridor. He assumed it was a servant moving furniture and opened the door to offer help. The corridor was empty, but the sound continued, receding into the darkness of the west wing. Busby questioned the butler the next day. The response was, "There are parts of the castle that are unused, sir. Old buildings make strange noises," but Busby noticed something peculiar. The butler did not ask what kind of noise he had heard, as if he already knew exactly what Busby meant. Local tradition holds that the monster Earl, as he came to be known in stories passed down through generations, lived until 1767, 281 years. Obviously impossible, yet the legend persists with a consistency folklorists find remarkable. It is not a story that changes significantly between versions. The details remain stable: the deformed child, the secret room, the impossible longevity. Where does that consistency come from if the story is entirely fabricated? Provisioning records offer a possible rational explanation. Between 1486 and 1767, the castle's food expenses consistently exceed the number of documented residents by approximately 15 to 20% every month for 281 years. Victorian administrators who reviewed these records in 1860 assumed accounting errors, but the figures are too consistent. Accounting mistakes produce random variation. These numbers show a pattern, a predictable surplus suggesting an extra mouth to feed, a mouth that appeared in no official record. Now let us be clear, no person lives for 281 years, but what if the monster Earl was not a single person but a succession of individuals? What if the deformity did not occur once in 1486, but recurred in later generations? Genetic conditions that cause severe deformities are often hereditary. If the responsible gene existed in the Loewen line, it could manifest repeatedly. Each generation might produce a child with the same characteristics, and each generation would face the same impossible choice: what to do with an heir who cannot inherit. The solution would be the same: officially declare the child dead and keep him alive in secret. The legend of a single monster earl who lived for centuries may actually be a compressed history of multiple individuals, all hidden in the same secret room, all maintained for the same reason. This theory explains several mysteries: why provisioning records show a surplus for 281 years, why multiple generations of Leon heirs react with the same visible horror when they learn the secret. They are not seeing historical evidence, they are seeing current evidence. Why the family has never revealed the secret, because the secret is not merely historical, it is genetic and could manifest again. In 1820, a physician named Dr. Beatty was summoned to the castle to treat the 13th Earl, who was ill. During his 3-day stay, he mentioned in private correspondence that he heard unusual sounds at night and that the castle staff seemed uncomfortably evasive when he asked about certain sections of the building. Dr. Beatty was not a superstitious man. He was an Edinburgh-trained physician, rational, scientific, yet he wrote, "There is something about this castle that disturbs the natural peace of a home. I cannot name it, but I feel it." He was never invited back. The story of the 1486 birth has officially been dismissed as local folklore without historical foundation. The Leon family has never commented on it directly. Academic historians treat it as a picturesque legend, lacking documentary evidence. But there are details that cannot be easily explained. The 3 missing years of parish records, exactly coinciding with a pregnancy, birth, and early childhood. The 11 rooms that disappeared from official plans in 1487, immediately after the supposed birth. The increase in provisioning expenses beginning in 1490 and continuing uninterrupted for centuries. The family tradition of revealing a secret to the heir, a tradition that begins precisely after 1486. The multiple testimonies from visitors and servants across centuries describing similar phenomena. Unexplained sounds, unseen presences, sections of the castle that are categorically forbidden. Individually, these elements could be coincidences. Together, they form a pattern, and patterns suggest intention. In 1850, Lady Strathmore wrote in her personal diary, discovered and auctioned in 1972, a fascinating entry: "My husband has finally revealed to me why certain rooms in the castle remain closed. I cannot write what he told me, for I have sworn not to do so. But I will say this: what our family has carried for generations is a burden that no amount of money or title can balance. There are nights when I wish we were simple farmers with no legacy to protect." She never elaborated, but the entry is dated October 23rd, 2 days after the anniversary of the alleged birth on October 21st. Coincidence? Perhaps. But at Glamis Castle, coincidences have a way of accumulating until they can no longer be dismissed. Janet Douglas was born in 1498, 12 years after the mysterious birth of 1486. She came from one of Scotland's most powerful families, the Douglases, Earls of Angus. Her marriage to John Lyon's 6th Lord Glamis was strategic, designed to consolidate power between 2 great Scottish houses. The marriage lasted only 5 years. John Lyon died in 1528, under circumstances vaguely described in records as sudden illness. Janet was widowed at 30, with a young son who would inherit the Glamis title. As a widow, Janet Douglas took administrative control of the castle while her son was a minor. It was during this period that something caught the attention of King James V. The relationship between the Douglases and the Scottish crown was complicated. The Douglases held so much power that they posed a potential threat. James V, young, paranoid, and determined to consolidate his authority, launched a systematic campaign to destroy the Douglases' influence. Janet, as a prominent family member, became a target. In 1537, she was arrested on charges of treason and witchcraft. The charges were absurd, even by the standards of the time. She was allegedly accused of conspiring to poison the king. She was said to have practiced witchcraft within the walls of Glamis Castle. She was claimed to have invoked dark spirits to curse the royal family. There was no credible evidence, but James V did not need evidence. He needed an example. The trial was a spectacle. Janet was tortured, the standard procedure in witchcraft cases. Under torture, people confess anything, but even under torment, Janet maintained her innocence on the poisoning charges. The witchcraft charges were more complicated. Testimonies presented at the trial mentioned dark practices at Glamis Castle, rituals in rooms that visitors could not find, inexplicable sounds in the night, a presence in the castle that disturbed anyone staying more than a few days. Janet did not deny that something unusual existed at Glamis. She denied that it was her responsibility. Trial records include a fascinating exchange. The prosecutor asked, "Does Lady Glamis deny that rooms exist in the castle used for purposes that offend God?" Her response, "Rooms exist in all ancient castles. What they contain is the affair of their owners, not their temporary administrators." A carefully crafted answer. She did not deny the existence of the rooms. She did not deny that they contained something offensive. She only denied her personal responsibility. The court was not interested in subtleties. Janet Douglas was found guilty of treason and witchcraft on July 3, 1537. But before dying, according to multiple testimonies recorded by observers, Janet uttered a curse. The exact words have been lost or deliberately not recorded, but the general content is consistent across historical sources. She cursed King James V, cursed those who testified falsely against her, and specifically cursed Glamis Castle. The curse on the castle was particular, that what the Lyon family hid would never find peace, that each generation would bear the weight of secrets that would destroy their tranquility, and that no heir would know true joy while the secret remained. Dramatic words from a woman unjustly executed, easy to dismiss as emotional desperation, except that James V died 5 years later, in 1542, at age 30, from what physicians called deep melancholy after a series of personal and military tragedies, except that every Lord Glamis since 1537 has had a life marked by premature death, family tragedy, or psychological collapse, except that multiple Lyon family members have described feeling a specific weight associated with the castle that they cannot rationally explain. Lady Glamis's curse became part of the castle's folklore. But the interesting part is not the curse itself. Executions of the era often spawned curse stories. The interesting part is how the Lyon family responded. After 1537, security measures around the secret room intensified dramatically. Castle records show the hiring of additional guards specifically for the north wing, not guards for the entire castle, just for one specific section. In 1540, 3 years after Janet's execution, architectural plans were updated again. This time, not only did rooms disappear, but passages were added that make no structural sense, corridors that seem to lead somewhere but end in walls. Intentional confusion, security through obscurity, or something more? In 1580, 43 years after the curse, a specific incident is recorded in the letters of a visitor, Sir William Ruthven. Sir William was staying at Glamis as a guest of the 7th Lord Glamis. One night, unable to sleep, he wandered the corridors. He came to a solid oak door he did not recognize from daytime tours. He pressed his ear against the wood. He heard breathing, not normal sleeping breath. Heavy, labored breathing as if someone with severe respiratory difficulties. Then, a sound he described as dragging, as if something heavy was moving with difficulty. Sir William, curious but discreet, returned to his room without mentioning it. The next morning, over breakfast, the 7th Lord Glamis asked him directly, "Did you hear anything unusual last night, Sir William?" The question was not casual, it was a test. Sir William, recognizing the gravity of the moment, replied, "Ancient castles have many sounds. I have learned not to pay them attention." The 7th Lord Glamis nodded slowly. That is useful wisdom at Glamis. Sir William was invited back multiple times. Other guests who asked too much or investigated too much were never invited again. Lady Glamis's curse did not create the castle's secret, but it made it harder to keep. Before 1537, the secret was simply a private family matter. After 1537, it became something with mythic weight. Janet's execution and public curse meant people now expected something wrong at Glamis, and when people expect mystery, they start looking for evidence. Visitors paid more attention to architectural inconsistencies. Local servants began sharing stories between villages. The Lyon family had to work harder to maintain silence. Ironically, the curse meant to expose the Lyon family's secret may have protected it, because now, any unusual occurrence at the castle could be explained as the curse. Strange sounds were not evidence of something real. They were supernatural manifestations. The mystical element provided cover for the physical reality. In 1606, when Shakespeare wrote Macbeth and chose Glamis as the setting for King Duncan's murder, he was capitalizing on a reputation already well established. Glamis was already known as a place of darkness, secrets and blood. Shakespeare did not invent that reputation, he reinforced it, and every subsequent generation of the Lyon family had to live with the accumulated weight of history, legend, and whatever really existed in the north wing of the castle. In 1677, Patrick Lyon, 3rd Earl of Strathmore, wrote an unusual clause in his will. I order my heir to keep closed those rooms that have remained closed, regardless of external curiosity or pressure. What they contain is a burden, but revealing that burden would be a greater betrayal than keeping it. He does not mention the curse directly, but the language, burden, betrayal, suggests that by then, the obligation to keep the secret had become part of the family identity, not just a secret to guard, but a sacred duty, and anyone who broke that duty would not only betray their family, but betray centuries of sacrifice by previous generations. Lady Glamis's curse may or may not have supernatural power, but it has psychological power, and that power has kept Glamis's secret hidden for nearly 500 years. In August 1869, Thomas Lyon Bowes, the 13th Earl of Strathmore, hosted a weekend gathering at Glamis Castle. It was not unusual. Aristocratic homes frequently held such events. Hunting by day, formal dinners in the evening, conversations blending politics, finance and social gossip. The guests that particular weekend included several Scottish aristocrats, 2 retired military officers, and an Edinburgh architect named Samuel Crawford. Crawford's inclusion would prove significant. During Friday night's dinner, conversation inevitably turned to the castle's legends. One guest, Lord Castletown, mentioned hearing stories of secret rooms and windows that did not match interior spaces. The 13th Earl gave his standard response: "All ancient castles have their tales. Glamis simply has more than most." But Samuel Crawford, the architect, made an interesting observation. "I have worked on dozens of ancient castles, Lord Strathmore, and I have learned that where there are architectural inconsistencies, there are usually structural reasons. I would love to study the plans of Glamis if you permit it." Purely from an academic viewpoint, the Earl politely declined. "The plans are private family documents, Mr. Crawford. I am sure you understand." The conversation moved on to other topics, but the question had been raised, and among the guests an idea began to form. On Saturday morning, while the Earl was occupied with estate matters, a group of 5 guests decided to conduct an experiment. The idea came from Major General Sir George Macpherson Grant, who had served in India and had experience with military architecture. "It's simple," he explained. "We hang towels from every window we can access. Then we walk around the castle and count. If every window has a towel, there is no mystery. If some windows lack towels," he did not need to finish the sentence. The group enlisted help from other guests. In total, 11 people participated in the experiment. Methodically, they spent 3 hours touring every accessible room in the castle. In each window, they hung a clearly visible white towel from the outside. Not all rooms were open, of course. There were locked doors, especially in the west wing, but they managed to access the vast majority of the castle considered in use. The process was thorough. Each participant carried a notebook, recording which rooms they had checked. When finished, they had hung towels in 224 windows. Then the group went outside. They deliberately walked the entire perimeter of the castle, counting every visible window. First round, 248 visible windows. They thought they had miscounted. Second round, more carefully, 248 windows. Third round, with 2 people counting independently, 248 windows. 24 windows had no towels. 24 windows belonged to rooms they had not accessed, or that did not exist in the spaces they had explored. Samuel Crawford, the architect, was more specific in his analysis. "It's not just 24 missing towels scattered randomly," he explained to the group. "They are clustered, specifically, in the west wing, second and third floors. Based on their positioning, they suggest an entire section of the castle, approximately 15 to 20 rooms that we simply could not find from the inside." The group decided to confront the Earl. It was Major General Macpherson Grant who raised the matter during Saturday night's dinner. "Lord Strathmore," he began with military tact, "some of us conducted an interesting exercise today, an informal architectural study, so to speak." The Earl, who had been cutting his venison, paused. His face, according to Macpherson Grant's memoirs, instantly lost all colour. "What sort of study, General? We simply counted windows from inside and outside. We found an interesting discrepancy." Silence at the table grew uncomfortable. The Earl carefully set down his knife and fork. "Gentlemen," he said finally, his voice controlled but tense, "I deeply regret that you felt the need to investigate my home in this manner. I fear the weekend has been more tiring than anticipated. I suggest we all retire early tonight." It was not a suggestion, it was a dismissal. On Sunday morning, the guests were politely but firmly sent away. Each received apologies for the abrupt end to the gathering, with vague excuses about urgent estate matters requiring the Earl's attention, but everyone understood the true message. Major General Macpherson Grant wrote in his memoirs, published in 1895, "I have faced enemy artillery on 3 continents. I have negotiated with tribal leaders holding my men's lives in their hands, but I have never seen fear like that on the Earl of Strathmore's face when he learned we had counted the windows. It was not anger, not aristocratic indignation, it was pure fear. Whatever those 24 windows hide, it was worth more to him than his social reputation, his dignity, perhaps even his life. None of the 11 participants in the towel experiment were ever invited back to Glamis Castle. Several tried to renew the friendship with the Earl through correspondence. Letters were replied to politely but coldly. The social relationship was over. Samuel Crawford, the architect, tried a different approach. He wrote an academic article on architectural anomalies in medieval Scottish castles, without naming Glamis specifically but describing the towel experiment in detail. The article was accepted for publication in the Edinburgh Architectural Journal. 2 weeks before the scheduled publication, Crawford received a visit from a lawyer representing the Lyon family. The content of that conversation was never made public, but the article was never published. Crawford withdrew it, citing concerns over data accuracy. Years later, Crawford confessed to a colleague that he had been threatened with libel lawsuits and offered generous compensation for his silence. He accepted the compensation. The 1869 towel experiment is important not only for what it revealed, but for the intensity of the family's response. In 1869, the Lyon family was already enormously wealthy. They had social connections that made them virtually untouchable. The 13th Earl could have simply laughed off the experiment. He could have dismissed it as harmless curiosity. He could have offered a benign explanation, old renovations, structural changes, errors in original plans. Instead, he destroyed decades-old social relationships, threatened legal action, paid bribes. This level of response only makes sense if what they were protecting was more than a historical embarrassing secret. Because in 1869, any secret from 1486 should have been merely of antiquarian interest. Whatever the 24 windows revealed was still relevant in 1869, it was still active, it was still something the family needed to protect at any cost. After the 1869 incident, security at Glamis was intensified again. Castle records show the hiring of additional night guards, new locks were installed on multiple doors, and most significantly, a directive was issued to all staff. Any servant caught discussing the missing windows with visitors or among themselves would be immediately dismissed without references. In an era when employment references were essential for future work, this threat was devastating. The servants quickly learned not to ask questions. The towel experiment also had an unexpected effect. It confirmed what many had suspected but could not prove. It was not just folklore, not just legend. There was physical, measurable, documented space within Glamis Castle that corresponded to no accessible room. Approximately 15 to 20 rooms, based on Crawford's analysis, 500 to 700 square meters of space. Enough for, what? A small apartment, a suite of rooms, a place where someone, or something, could live completely hidden from the outside world, for years, decades, perhaps centuries. Elizabeth Angela Marguerite Bowes-Lyon was born on August 4, 1900, at Glamis Castle. She was the 9th of 10 children of Claude Bowes-Lyon, the 14th Earl of Strathmore. She spent much of her childhood at the castle. Her childhood memories, shared in later interviews, describe an idyllic early life, playing in the gardens, exploring the surrounding woods, and staging plays with her siblings in the Great Hall. Glamis was her home, but it was a home with specific boundaries. In interviews throughout her life, Elizabeth always described Glamis with genuine affection. She called it a magical place, full of history and charm. But when journalists asked about specific sections of the castle, her responses became carefully vague. "Oh, it was so large," she would say, "a child could easily get lost. Some parts were closed for safety reasons, you know. Steep stairs, low ceilings, not suitable for children." Technically true, but not the whole truth. Elizabeth had 9 siblings, 4 older brothers, 3 older sisters, 1 younger brother, and 1 younger sister. Her older brothers, Patrick, John, and Alexander, all underwent the family ritual upon turning 21. All were taken to the room, all learned the secret, and all, according to surviving family members, experienced the same psychological change as their predecessors. Elizabeth, as a woman, was never included in the ritual. The tradition was specific. Only direct male heirs were to know. Women, even those born into the family, were excluded. But Elizabeth lived at Glamis for 22 years before marrying Prince Albert, Duke of York, in 1923. 22 years in a castle where some of her brothers knew a secret that visibly devastated them. How could she not have noticed? In 1925, 2 years after her marriage, Elizabeth invited her husband Albert to spend a week at Glamis. It was Albert's first extended visit to his wife's castle. according to royal biographer John Wheeler Bennett, based on private royal family documents. Something occurred during that visit that Albert found deeply disturbing. Wheeler Bennett does not specify what, but he notes that Albert, who had enjoyed the early part of the visit, requested to leave 2 days earlier than planned. When asked why, Albert supposedly said, "There is something about that castle that is not right. I cannot name it, but I feel it." Elizabeth never commented on her husband's early departure, and Albert never returned to Glamis. Over the next 50 years, as Elizabeth became Queen Consort and then Queen Mother, she visited Glamis regularly, but always alone or with members of her Lyon family. She never invited other members of the royal family. She never suggested Glamis as a location for royal family gatherings. The castle, so central to her public identity as the site of her idyllic childhood, remained curiously separate from her royal life. In 1936, when Albert unexpectedly became King George VI after his brother Edward's abdication, the pressure on the royal family was immense. Elizabeth, now Queen Consort, became a public figure under constant scrutiny. Journalists wanted stories about her life, her childhood, her family. Glamis Castle was a perfect topic, romantic, historic, picturesque, but Elizabeth set firm boundaries. She would talk about the gardens, about family meals, about playing on the grounds, but when asked about the interior architecture, specific rooms, or the private areas of the castle, her responses became notably brief. "There are parts of the castle that are private family matters," she would say. "All families have their privacy, even in large homes," a reasonable response. But her body language, noted by several veteran journalists, suggested discomfort, not the kind of discomfort that comes from protecting embarrassing gossip, the kind that comes from carrying knowledge that cannot be shared. William Shawcross, Elizabeth's official biographer, had unprecedented access to private documents and family members. His biography, published in 2009, is the definitive work on the Queen Mother. In it, he includes a fascinating line based on private conversations with Elizabeth in her later years. The Queen Mother confessed to having experiences at Glamis that she could never share, not even with the king. Shawcross does not elaborate, but the language is specific. Experiences, not memories. Experiences imply direct events, not second-hand information. What could a woman who lived 21 years in the castle have experienced directly? In 1952, Elizabeth became Queen Mother after her husband's death. Her daughter Elizabeth II was now queen. Over the following decades, the Queen Mother maintained an active public presence. She visited Glamis regularly, usually in August for family celebrations, but there is a curious detail in the records of these visits, documented in castle staff diaries now in the public domain. The Queen Mother always stayed in the same suite of rooms, not the largest, not the most ornate, but specifically a suite in the East Wing, never in the West Wing. When staff suggested that rooms in the West Wing offered better views or were more spacious, Elizabeth consistently declined. "I prefer my usual rooms," she would say. "They are the ones from my childhood." But records show that in her childhood, Elizabeth frequently slept in different rooms of the castle, depending on the season and which relatives were visiting. The insistence on the East Wing only began after her marriage in 1923, after her older brothers had learned the secret, after she had spent enough time in the castle to notice patterns of behaviour in her family. In 1978, Lady Elizabeth Anson, the Queen Mother's niece, gave an interview for a documentary on Scottish aristocratic homes. During the interview, she casually mentioned, "My aunt always loved Glamis, but there were parts of the castle she actively avoided. When I was a child, I once asked why we never went to the West Wing. She became very serious and said, 'Some doors are closed for reasons, and the reasons are better than the curiosities.'" The quote is notable because it uses active warning language, not passive restriction. Not "those rooms are closed," but "those doors are closed for reasons." It implies intentional purpose. It implies knowledge of what is being contained. During the Second World War, Glamis Castle was used as a rehabilitation hospital for wounded soldiers. Elizabeth, as Queen Consort, visited the castle hospital several times to boost troop morale. Soldiers stationed there later reported strange experiences, consistent nightmares, feelings of being watched, inexplicable sounds at night, but only soldiers assigned to certain rooms in the West Wing reported these phenomena. 3 soldiers requested transfers after less than a week. Military medical records, declassified in 1995, show that the 3 were psychiatrically evaluated. The diagnosis was war trauma, but the 3 had been assigned to Glamis for rehabilitation after minor physical injuries. None had yet seen active combat. What traumatized them? Elizabeth, during her visits to the castle hospital, specifically insisted that tours for soldiers and journalists exclude the West Wing. Officially, because those rooms were in poor state of preservation and not suitable for display, but photographs from the period show the West Wing was in similar condition to the rest of the castle. The exclusion was not due to structural condition. In 2002, the Queen Mother died at the age of 101. Her funeral was a national event of mourning, but there was one small detail that few noticed. After the official ceremony, her body was briefly taken to Glamis Castle before final burial. The family arranged a private vigil. According to castle staff members, the vigil took place in the Great Hall, but after the guests departed, the current Earl of Strathmore, the Queen Mother's nephew, took the coffin to another part of the castle for approximately 20 minutes. Only he and 2 trusted staff members. When he returned, he offered no explanation. The Queen Mother took whatever she knew about Glamis to her grave. She never wrote detailed memoirs about her childhood at the castle. She never gave in-depth interviews about her private family life. She never allowed full documentaries about the interior of Glamis, and by all accounts, she never told her husband King George VI what she had experienced or suspected about her family's secret. If a woman who became Queen of England considered the secret too dangerous to share even with her own husband, what does that say about the nature of that secret? In 1891, the 13th Earl of Strathmore decided to modernise Glamis Castle. It was not unusual. The Victorian era saw a massive wave of restorations of ancient castles throughout Britain. Modern plumbing, gas lighting, central heating. These amenities required extensive structural work. The Earl hired the Edinburgh architectural firm Robertson & Forbes, respected for their work on historic properties. The project should have been straightforward, but from the beginning there were problems. The architects arrived with measuring teams, ready to create complete surveys of the castle before beginning any work. A full measurement is standard practice in architectural restoration. Every room, every hallway, every staircase is measured. The thickness of every wall is recorded. All structural features are documented. These data create an accurate plan that guides the entire renovation. The architects from Robertson & Forbes spent 3 weeks measuring the castle, and then they came to the Earl with a problem. The numbers did not match. Specifically, when measuring the castle from the exterior, total length of each wall, height of each level, and then measuring each interior room and adding those measurements, there were significant discrepancies. In the West Wing, second floor, approximately 150 square meters were missing. In the North Wing, third floor, 85 square meters were missing. In total, approximately 235 square meters of space existed, physically, but did not appear in the interior measurements. The lead architect, James Robertson, initially assumed measurement error. His team remeasured twice, 3 times. The numbers remained consistent. Approximately 235 square meters of space could not be explained. Robertson scheduled a meeting with the Earl. Lord Strathmore, he explained, showing his detailed plans. We have an unusual situation. The exterior dimensions of your castle do not match the interiors. Based on my calculations, there are approximately 235 square meters of space, enough for 15 to 20 rooms that do not appear in our interior survey. The Earl studied the plans in silence. Is it possible, he asked finally, that your team has simply made errors in the measurements? Robertson was a professional with 30 years of experience. Sir, he replied diplomatically but firmly, I have personally overseen 3 complete measurements. I have worked on dozens of ancient castles. The discrepancies here are unique in my experience. They are not errors. The Earl nodded slowly. Mr. Robertson, I appreciate your thorough work. However, there are sections of this castle that have remained unused for generations, structures added in different periods, then sealed for reasons of safety or stability. The historical plans are inconsistent because multiple generations made changes without properly documenting them. A reasonable explanation. Except that Robertson had seen the historical plans and the discrepancies did not correspond to known renovation areas. Lord Strathmore, Robertson pressed, if you could grant me access to all areas of the castle, including sealed sections, we could fully document the structure. This would be invaluable for the integrity of the renovation. That will not be possible, Mr. Robertson. The Earl's tone left no room for discussion. You will proceed with the renovations based on the areas to which you have access. The closed sections will remain closed. If this presents challenges, I trust your professional expertise to resolve them. Robertson tried a different approach. Sir, there are safety considerations. If there are significant voids within the walls, we need to verify their structural stability. A collapse during renovation could... The structures in question have remained stable for centuries, Mr. Robertson. They will continue to do so. Your task is to modernize the accessible areas, not to investigate areas sealed by my ancestors for reasons that do not concern external architects. The message was clear. The project continued, But Robertson did something interesting. He kept detailed private records of the discrepancies. These records were discovered in the firm's archives in 1978, when Robertson and Forbes closed after 120 years of operation. The documents include not only measurements but Robertson's handwritten notes. West wing, second floor, missing space of approximately 150 square meters. Configuration suggests not structural voids but actual rooms. Windows visible from the exterior, I counted 15, do not correspond to any accessible interior room. Earl extremely defensive when mentioned. Project proceeds without full access, most unsatisfactory situation in my career. Robertson's workers also noticed strange things. One of them, a stonemason named William McGregor, kept a diary of his time working at Glamis. The diary was donated to the local Angus Museum in 1932 after his death. In it, McGregor describes an experience on October 15, 1891. I pressed my ear against it and heard something strange, like heavy breathing or wind through a crack. But there was no wind that day. I mentioned this to the foreman. He told me to leave that stone alone and focus on another section. When I returned the next day, someone had sealed the space with fresh mortar. No one mentioned it. McGregor does not elaborate on what he thought the sound was, but his description, heavy breathing, echoes multiple earlier testimonies from visitors and servants over the centuries. The 1891 renovation project also revealed another peculiarity. When the workers installed central heating, they needed to connect radiators throughout the castle. This required tracing the existing chimney system to understand airflow and ventilation. The chimney ducts did not match the rooms either. The castle's main chimney has ducts carrying smoke and hot air upward. Tracing these ducts from the basement, the engineers identified branches leading to chimneys in known rooms, but there were 4 branches that did not correspond to any visible chimney in accessible rooms. Heat was being directed to rooms that were not on the plans. One of the engineers, Alexander Drummond, reported this to the Earl. The response was brief: "Old chimneys, sealed generations ago. Do not concern yourselves with them." But if the chimneys were sealed, why were the ducts still actively functioning, conducting heat? Drummond did not press the matter, but in his final technical report to the Earl included in the Robertson and Forbes archives, he wrote, "Chimney system partially inexplicable. 4 active ducts do not correspond to visible chimneys. Recommend future investigation for optimal energy efficiency. However, I understand access to certain areas is restricted for family historical reasons. Diplomatic language for this makes no sense, but I am not allowed to investigate." The renovation project was finally completed in 1893. Robertson and Forbes were paid generously, but the firm was never hired again by the Leon family. In 1908, during minor renovations, a different contractor, a local firm from Dundee, sent workers to repair leaking roofs. One of the workers, while in the attic space of the West Wing, noticed something peculiar. The West Wing roof covers a larger space than would correspond to the rooms below. He measured approximately. Then he went down and measured the accessible rooms on the second floor of the West Wing. 15 meters were missing. When he mentioned this to the castle steward, he was instructed not to discuss his observations with anyone and to complete his work without further measurements. In 1972, a team of architectural historians from the University of Edinburgh requested permission to conduct an academic study of Glamis. The proposed project would include full photography, architectural measurements, and documentation of all historical changes to the building. The Leon family denied permission. In 1985, the BBC proposed a documentary on historic castles of Scotland. Glamis would be one of several featured castles. The production team offered £50,000 and promised full editorial control to the family over the final content. The Leon family rejected the proposal. In 2003, during routine minor renovations, a contractor installing new electrical wiring in the West Wing noticed the same discrepancies Robertson had documented in 1891. Sonaidic and empty space between accessible rooms, ventilation ducts leading to areas not on the plans. When he asked the 18th Earl about access for safe wiring, he was directed to route around the inaccessible areas. The contractor, in a 2004 interview with the local newspaper, said, "I have worked on dozens of ancient castles. There are always oddities, but Glamis is different. They are not random quirks, they are systematic. Someone deliberately designed sections of the castle to be inaccessible yet maintained. The architectural evidence is not ambiguous. Multiple professionals, over more than a century, measuring independently, all reach the same conclusion. There are approximately 135 square meters of space in Glamis Castle that exist physically, that actively receives heat and ventilation, but that does not appear on any official plan and to which no external access is permitted. That is not folklore, that is not legend, that is measurable physical geometry, and no rational explanation offered by the Lyon family accounts for why that space needs to remain so fiercely protected after more than 500 years. Today, Glamis Castle receives visitors from around the world, with tours showcasing its rich history and stunning interiors. Official guided tours last about 50 minutes. Visitors see 12 main rooms, the Great Hall, the drawing room, the library, the dining room, and several state bedrooms adorned with 17th century Flemish tapestries and family portraits spanning 8 centuries. Tour guides share stories about the Queen Mother. They point out the room where she was born. They mention Shakespeare and Macbeth. They discuss the medieval architecture, Victorian renovations, and the history of the Lion-Boas family. But there are topics that tour guides have been specifically trained to avoid. If a visitor asks about secret rooms, the response is, like many ancient castles, Glamis has been modified over centuries. Some historical plans are inconsistent due to poorly documented renovations. If a visitor asks about the Monster Earl, the response is, that is a fascinating local legend, but it has no documented historical basis. If a visitor asks why the West Wing is closed, the response is, ongoing conservation and structural safety considerations. The castle is 900 years old. Not all areas can be kept open to the public. Reasonable answers. Technically true, but incomplete. The West Wing remains permanently closed, not to visitors, not to academics, not to documentary crews, not to architects. To no one outside 3 specific people, the 19th Earl of Strathmore, his adult heir, and the castle's steward. The same tradition that began in 1486, 539 years of uninterrupted continuity. In 2007, Simon Bowes-Lyon turned 21. As heir to the 18th Earl, he was taken to the room according to family tradition. There is no public record of what he saw, but according to extended family members, Simon, who had been outgoing and sociable, became notably more reserved after that day. In 2016, Simon became the 19th Earl of Strathmore, following his father's death. He is now one of the 3 custodians of the secret. In a rare interview with The Scotsman in 2018, he was asked about the famous legends of Glamis. His response was carefully crafted. Every ancient family has stories passed down through generations. Some are entertaining, some are exaggerated, and some are private matters that do not concern the public. Glamis has been in my family since 1372. We have survived wars, revolutions, massive societal changes. We have survived because we understand the difference between what should be shared and what should be protected. The journalist pressed, but is there a real secret, or is it just clever marketing for tourism? Simon smiled slightly. If I told you there was no secret, you wouldn't believe me. If I told you there was a secret, you'd want to know what it is. So I'll say this, Glamis is exactly what it appears to be, a medieval castle with a long and complicated history. The complications are ours to manage, not to display. It is not a confirmation, it is not a denial, it is the perfectly calibrated response of someone trained from birth to protect information. In recent years, technology has advanced in ways that the lords of Glamis from the 15th century could never have anticipated. Ground-penetrating radar can see through walls. Drones with thermal cameras can detect temperature differences, indicating hidden habitable spaces. Acoustic resonance analysis can map voids within structures. In 2019, a team of YouTube enthusiasts specializing in architectural mysteries flew a drone around Glamis Castle with a thermal camera. The video, uploaded to YouTube, showed temperature patterns consistent with heated rooms in the West Wing, specifically in areas that do not correspond to any publicly accessible room. The video received 2.3 million views. A week later, it was removed following a copyright claim from the law firm representing the Lyon family. The YouTube team appealed, arguing they filmed from public airspace. The legal dispute lasted 6 months. Eventually, a confidential settlement was reached. The video was never re-uploaded, but screenshots circulate on internet forums, and the questions persist. The nature of Glamis's secret has spawned theories for centuries. Some are sensational and easily dismissed. Secret tunnels to other castles, hidden treasures, ancient political conspiracies. Some are more plausible but still unconfirmed, compromising historical documents, evidence of medieval-era crimes, forbidden religious practices. But the evidence, the physical, measurable, documented evidence, suggests something more specific. The rooms actively receive heat. That means they need to be habitable. The spaces have been maintained for over 500 years. That means they are not just historical storage. Every heir who learns the secret experiences visible psychological trauma. That means the secret involves something currently present, not just historically relevant. The family protects the secret with significant legal and financial resources. That means exposure would have severe consequences. Taken together, these facts point to a possibility that the Lyon family will never confirm or deny that what began in 1486, whether a deformed heir, a recurring genetic condition, or something else, did not end in the 15th century, that the obligation to protect, maintain and conceal has continued through generations, that the rooms in the West Wing are not a museum of historical shame, but an active facility, with an ongoing purpose and a responsibility that every Earl of Strathmore must accept upon inheriting the title. This theory would explain everything: why the spaces are maintained and heated, why the heirs react with such horror, why the family spends considerable resources protecting the secret, why no amount of time makes the secret safe to reveal. Because if the secret is a genetic legacy, not historical, then every generation could face the same decision the Lyon family faced in 1486. What do you do with an heir who cannot be presented to the world, but whom you also cannot, in conscience, allow to die? This is speculation. There is no direct evidence confirming this theory, but it is the theory that best fits all available data, and it is the theory that explains why, even today, the 19th Earl of Strathmore keeps the same doors closed that his 15th century ancestors did. Glamis Castle endures, 300 rooms open for the world to see, approximately 18 rooms that the world will never see. The tours continue, visitors take photographs, children hear stories about queens and ghosts, and in the West Wing, behind doors that appear on no official map, behind 5-meter thick walls, in rooms that receive heat from chimneys that officially do not exist, something remains, something that 14 generations of the Lyon family have decided is more important to protect than anything honesty could gain. The question is no longer whether a secret exists. The architectural evidence confirms hidden spaces. Historical documentation confirms a tradition of selective revelation. Family behavior confirms active protection of specific information. The real question is simpler and more impossible to answer. What could justify 539 years of absolute silence? What could be worth more than reputation, mental peace, natural historical curiosity? What compels each heir, man after man, generation after generation, to choose family obligation over personal transparency? Perhaps we will never know. Perhaps the 19th Earl will take the secret to his grave, as his father did, and his grandfather, and the 12 Earls before them. Perhaps his son, when he turns 21, will be taken to that room, learn what generations have learned, and make the same choice generations have made. Or perhaps in some future generation, someone will decide that enough centuries have passed, that what was unimaginable in 1486 is now understandable today. That truth, no matter how strange, is preferable to the weight of silence. But that day is not today. Today, Glamis Castle stands beneath the Scottish sky. Its 5-meter thick walls guard what they have guarded for over half a millennium, and the windows of the West Wing reflect the sunlight. 24 windows that, according to all official documents, should not exist. But they do, and behind them, in rooms no visitor will ever see, in spaces no plan acknowledges, the last secret of the British aristocracy remains intact, waiting, as it has waited for 539 years. For over 500 years, Glamis Castle has employed hundreds of servants, cooks, butlers, maids, gardeners, guards. In the Victorian era, a castle the size of Glamis required a staff of between 40 and 60 people working full-time. But there was a special category of servants, those assigned specifically to the North and West Wings, and some of them were never seen again after leaving service at Glamis. In the parish records of Glamis village, between 1650 and 1850, there is a peculiar pattern. Approximately every 15 to 20 years, a castle servant disappears from all public records. No subsequent marriage records, no death records in the region, no appearances in censuses from other areas. They simply vanish. In 1687, a servant named Malcolm Petrie worked at Glamis for 3 years. Pay records show he received regular wages, but in September 1687, the payments stop. No record of dismissal, no letter of reference, essential for any servant seeking future employment, no record of his presence anywhere else in Scotland after that date. Malcolm Petrie was 24 years old when he disappeared from the records. In 1702, a maid named Margaret Ogilvie was hired specifically for service in private rooms of the North Wing. Her salary was significantly higher than that of other maids, double in fact. She worked for 6 years. In 1708, pay records show an unusual entry: M. Ogilvie, full service, final compensation. After that, nothing. Margaret does not appear in any marriage records, no will in her name when she would have reached old age, no gravestone in any regional cemetery. For a woman who had earned double the standard salary for 6 years, enough to establish herself comfortably, the lack of any subsequent trace is strange. In 1756, a night guard named Robert Erskine was hired under a specific contract to watch the West Wing during nighttime hours. His pay included a bonus for absolute discretion. He worked for 11 years. In 1767, records show an extraordinary final payment, £200, equivalent to approximately 5 years' salary. £200 in 1767 was enough to buy a small farm. Robert Erskine disappears completely from all records after receiving that payment. He does not purchase land which would require legal registration. He does not appear in any census, no death record. What kind of employer pays 5 years' salary as final compensation? And why does that employee then disappear so completely that they leave no trace in any public document? In 1823, the local pastor of Glamis wrote in his private diaries, now archived in the National Library of Scotland, a curious entry. I visited the Mackenzie family today. The mother is deeply distressed. Her son David, who worked at the castle, has not written in 18 months. The castle steward assured her that David is well established elsewhere, but refused to provide an address or details. The poor woman fears something terrible has happened. I attempted to obtain information from the Earl, but was politely rebuffed. David Mackenzie was 22 years old when hired at Glamis in 1821, specifically for specialized service in restricted wing. His mother never heard from him again. The pattern is consistent. Young servants, hired specifically for restricted areas, salary significantly higher than standard, work for several years, and then complete disappearance from all public records. Now let us be clear about something important. In the 18th and 19th centuries, it was not unusual for people to disappear from records. Migration was common. People moved to cities, to America, to Australia. Records were inconsistent. There were no centralized databases, but these cases are different. These are servants who worked specifically in the castle's most sensitive areas, who received extraordinary final payments, and who then disappeared so completely that not even their own families could locate them. There are 3 possible explanations. First option, these servants were generously paid to relocate far away and maintain absolute silence, perhaps given new identities, perhaps paid to live discreetly elsewhere in Britain or abroad. This would explain the extraordinary payments and the lack of trace, but it raises the question, what could these servants know that justified that level of effort and expense? Second option, these servants died while working at the castle, possibly from illness or accident, and were buried discreetly without official records to avoid questions about the circumstances of their deaths. This would explain the total disappearance, but it raises darker questions about what was occurring in those restricted rooms that could cause death. Third option, these servants never left the castle. They remained there, serving permanently in the hidden rooms, never allowed to leave because of what they knew. This seems extreme, almost medieval, but remember, we are talking about a family that has maintained a secret for over 500 years, a family that has destroyed decades-old social relationships, threatened legal action, and paid significant bribes to protect that secret. Is it so unthinkable that they would also ensure permanent silence from those who had direct contact with what was being hidden? In 1842, a specific incident was documented in the diary of Dr. Henry Robertson, physician of Glamis village. Dr. Robertson was called to the castle to attend a servant who had suffered a severe nervous collapse. The servant, whose name Dr. Robertson did not record, was in a state of absolute terror. Dr. Robertson wrote, "The young man spoke incoherently about things that should not live, and rooms where God does not enter. He was sweating profusely, trembling, and completely unable to calm himself. I recommended complete rest and sedation. The castle steward thanked me and asked that I not discuss the case with anyone, including in my medical records. I received generous compensation for my discretion." Dr. Robertson never officially recorded the case, but he mentioned it in his private diary, which was donated to the local museum after his death in 1878. The servant in question was never publicly identified and does not appear in any subsequent employment records in the region. The practice of hiring servants for the restricted areas continues to this day, but in the modern era, with digital databases, social security systems, and constant surveillance, it is much harder to make someone disappear completely. Modern servants hired for the West Wing sign extraordinarily restrictive non-disclosure agreements. According to an anonymous source who worked briefly at Glamis in the 1990s, interviewed by an investigative journalist in 2005, but never publicly identified, these agreements include absolute prohibition on discussing any aspect of the work with anyone, including immediate family, prohibition on recording any observations in writing, photography, or audio, penalty clauses including legal action for defamation and lawsuits for damages in case of breach, and most disturbingly, a clause requiring the employee to report any attempts by third parties to obtain information about the restricted areas. The anonymous source worked only 3 weeks before resigning. When asked why she resigned from a well-paid position, she replied, "There are things money isn't worth. There were rooms in that castle that made the air feel different when you approached them. I can't explain it better than that. I'll just say I understand why they pay so well, and why they demand so much silence. The persistent question is, what do modern servants see that requires that level of control? If the secret rooms are just empty spaces with historical documents, why would a servant resign after 3 weeks? If the secret is simply historical family shame, why does the heir feel different? Servants are witnesses, not voluntary witnesses like the heirs who are prepared from birth, but accidental witnesses who see things they never expected to see. And throughout Glamis's history, those witnesses have been handled in ways ranging from generous compensation to complete disappearance, which leads to an uncomfortable question: how many secrets can a family keep if they systematically eliminate anyone who might reveal them? And how far is the Leon family willing to go to ensure that the secret of Glamis never leaves those 5-meter thick walls? In 1902, an Austrian physician named Archibald Garrod published a groundbreaking article. He described conditions now known as inborn errors of metabolism, genetic diseases passed from generation to generation in predictable patterns. Garrod's work laid the foundations for modern medical genetics, and it raises a fascinating question about Glamis Castle. What if the secret is not a single historical event, but a recurring genetic condition? Mendelian genetics, the inheritance patterns discovered by Gregor Mendel, explains how certain traits are passed from parents to children. Some conditions are dominant. You only need to inherit one copy of the gene to manifest the condition. Others are recessive. You need copies from both parents. And some are X-linked. They primarily affect males because they have only one X chromosome. If the Lion family carries a recessive gene for a condition causing severe deformities, the pattern would be predictable. Most generations would produce completely normal children. But occasionally, when both parents are carriers, a child would be born with the full condition, and that child would statistically be male in about 50% of cases. This would explain several mysteries: why the secret is not a one-time event in 1486, but an ongoing obligation that each generation must manage; why heirs who learn the secret are traumatized. They are not seeing ancient history, they are learning about a genetic possibility they could pass to their own children; why the family protects the secret so fiercely, because revealing a familial genetic condition would destroy marriage prospects for all family members. In historical times, and frankly well into the 20th century, aristocratic families thoroughly investigated bloodlines before approving marriages. A known genetic condition would have made the Leon family socially untouchable. There are real genetic conditions that could match historical descriptions of the monster Earl. Proteus syndrome causes disproportionate tissue growth, creating severe deformities. Patients may have limbs of vastly different sizes, excessive bone growth, and tissue masses. Intelligence is generally unaffected. Severe achondroplasia, a form of dwarfism that can cause highly unusual body proportions, especially with complications. Historically, before modern medical intervention, deformities could be far more pronounced. Treacher-Collins syndrome affects facial development, causing severe craniofacial malformations. Patients may have impaired hearing and breathing, but normal intelligence. Neurofibromatosis type 1 causes benign tumors on nerves throughout the body, potentially creating an extremely disfigured appearance. Tumors can be massive. All these conditions have genetic components. All could manifest with varying severity across generations, and all would leave the person with intact intelligence, fully aware of their own condition, capable of communication, but physically impossible to present in aristocratic society. Now, here is the disturbing part. If the Lion family is a recessive gene, the probability of it manifesting increases dramatically with inbreeding, and British aristocracy practiced extensive inbreeding. Cousins regularly married cousins. The same families intermarried repeatedly. This was not seen as problematic, it was how wealth and power were kept within trusted circles. But genetically, inbreeding makes rare recessive genes far more likely to manifest. If the Lion gene exists, each generation marrying within closed aristocratic circles increases the risk that two carriers wed and produce an affected child. The Lion family's marriage records show exactly this pattern. Between 1500 and 1900, the family married into a very limited group: Douglas, Gordon, Stuart, Murray, Bowes. The same families appear repeatedly in the family tree. This is typical of Scottish aristocracy, but it also creates precisely the conditions where a recessive genetic condition would manifest more frequently than in the general population. In 1881, something extraordinary appears in the family records. Claude Bowes Lyon, the 14th Earl, married Cecilia Nina Cavendish Bentinck. Cecilia was from an aristocratic family, but the marriage introduced new blood outside the tightest Scottish circles. Genetically, bringing fresh blood from outside the closed inbreeding group would be exactly the way to reduce the risk of recessive gene manifestation. Claude Bowes-Lyon, who had learned the family secret in 1876, may have deliberately chosen a wife to dilute the genetic risk. There is no way to know for certain, but the timing is suggestive, and Cecilia produced 10 children, all healthy, including Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the future Queen Mother. None of her children showed the deformities described in the Monster Earl legends, but here is the unsettling part. If the gene is recessive, it can skip generations. Claude and Cecilia's children could be carriers without manifesting the condition, and if 2 carriers marry in later generations, the condition could reappear. In 1987, advances in medical genetics made possible something that would have been science fiction just decades earlier: prenatal genetic testing, amniocentesis, chorionic villus sampling, and eventually non-invasive blood tests can detect many genetic conditions before birth. If the Lyon family carries a known gene, modern generations could test for it. They could know, before marriage, if they are carriers. They could know, during pregnancy, if a fetus is affected, and they could make decisions previous generations could not. But this only works if the family knows exactly which gene they are looking for, and that would require something the Lyon family has never allowed: full medical examination and genetic sequencing of any affected individual, living or deceased. If remains exist in the castle, as multiple generations of testimony suggest might be the case, those remains would contain DNA. That DNA could be sequenced, the condition could be precisely identified, and then finally the family would know exactly what they are dealing with. But doing so would require admitting there is something to investigate. It would require opening the sealed rooms. It would require inviting external scientists. It would require surrendering absolute control over the secret, and after 539 years of protection, that step is apparently impossible for the Lyon family. The genetic hypothesis answers many questions, but it raises new ones. If the condition is genetic and recurring, how many affected individuals have existed throughout the family's history? 1 per century? 1 per generation in times of bad luck? Where are those individuals now? If the Monster Earl legend of one living until 1767 is really multiple individuals compressed into one narrative, how many rooms in the West Wing are or were occupied? And what happens to an individual with severe deformities but intact intelligence, kept hidden in secret rooms for an entire lifetime? What kind of existence is that? And what kind of care do they require? These questions lead to profoundly uncomfortable ethical considerations, because if the genetic hypothesis is correct, we are not talking about history. We are talking about real, living, conscious people. People who never asked to be born with these conditions. People who are being kept hidden not for their own good, but for the family's reputation. And that is not a fascinating historical secret. That is something far darker. In 1996, investigative journalist David McClure decided to solve the mystery of Glamis Castle once and for all. McClure was no amateur. He had worked for the Sunday Times for 15 years, specializing in in-depth investigative stories about the British aristocracy. He had exposed financial scandals, infidelities, and political secrets of some of the United Kingdom's most powerful families. He thought Glamis would be another similar project. He spent 18 months investigating. He interviewed more than 40 former castle employees. He reviewed records in 6 different archives in Scotland and England. He hired an independent architect to analyze historical and modern photographs of the castle. He requested multiple interviews with the 18th Earl of Strathmore, all rejected. In 1998, McClure published an article in the Sunday Times titled "The Impenetrable Secret of Glamis." The article was 8,000 words long. It meticulously documented all the architectural inconsistencies. It presented testimonies from servants about disturbing experiences. It discussed the genetic theory with support from medical geneticists. And it ended with an admitted frustration. After 18 months of investigation, I am convinced that there is something genuinely extraordinary at Glamis Castle, but I am also convinced that we will never know it. The Lyon family has perfected, over more than 5 centuries, the art of keeping secrets in an era where secrets are almost impossible to keep. The article generated significant interest, but it changed nothing. The Lyon family did not respond. There were no official statements, no libel lawsuits which would have drawn more attention. Simply silence, the silence they have maintained for more than 500 years. In 2003, a BBC team proposed a documentary using modern technology. Specifically, they wanted to use ground-penetrating radar (GPR) to fully map the castle. GPR can see through stone walls. It can detect voids, hidden rooms, even buried objects. It is standard technology in archaeology and historical restoration. The BBC offered full editorial control to the Leon family. They promised that any discovery could be vetoed from the final broadcast. They offered £150,000 for the privilege of filming. The proposal was rejected without explanation. In 2008, a group of paranormal enthusiasts requested permission for an overnight investigation at the castle. This type of request is common in historic UK castles. Many castles allow them. It generates publicity and, frankly, additional income. Glamis Castle rejected the request. In 2012, an architectural historian from the University of St Andrews proposed a PhD project focused specifically on the architectural evolution of Glamis. The project would require full access to all historical plans and complete modern measurements of the building. The university officially backed the project. The Scottish government had expressed interest in the results to inform historic preservation policies. The Leon family rejected access. In 2015, Historic Environment Scotland, the government agency responsible for preserving historic buildings, expressed concerns about certain parts of the castle that had not been inspected in decades, specifically the West Wing. Legitimate safety concerns. A 900-year-old castle requires constant maintenance. Sections uninspected for decades could have dangerous structural deterioration. Historic Environment Scotland requested access for a routine safety inspection. After months of negotiation, a compromise was reached. Inspectors would be allowed into certain areas of the West Wing, but accompanied at all times by the Earl or his designated representative, and all notes and photographs would be reviewed before the inspectors could leave the castle. The inspectors accepted these terms. They completed their inspection in 2 days. Their official report concluded, structure generally sound with adequate maintenance. Some areas require minor work. Full access was not granted to all sections due to family privacy considerations. But one of the inspectors, in a private conversation with a colleague several years later, recorded in internal documents leaked in 2019, said something else. There were rooms in that castle that were clearly being actively maintained. Not storage, not rooms closed for decades, rooms with functional heating systems, modern locks, and signs of regular use. When I asked about access to those specific rooms, I was told they were private family archives. But archives do not need constant heating. This comment was never part of the official report, but it suggests that even government inspectors with legal authority could not fully access all areas of the castle. The pattern is consistent. Every modern investigative attempt, journalistic, academic, scientific, even governmental, has been blocked. Not aggressively, not with public drama, simply with polite denials and silence. And here is what is fascinating. In the modern era, this level of secrecy is almost impossible to maintain. We live in an age of leaks, hackers, whistleblowers, hidden cameras, drones. Government secrets are exposed, corporate scandals are revealed, celebrity indiscretions are photographed. And yet, the Lyon family has kept their secret intact. How? Partly through economic power. The Lyon family has significant financial resources. They can hire the best lawyers. They can threaten costly litigation that deters individual investigators or small media organizations. Partly through social connections. The Lyon family is linked to Britain's most powerful aristocratic families, including the royal family. These connections provide protection from certain types of public scrutiny. But more fundamentally, through something simpler, absolute consistency. For 539 years, every Earl of Strathmore has kept the secret. There have been no rebels, no heirs who decided transparency was more important than tradition, no deathbed crises of conscience leading to revelations. Every generation has chosen secrecy over disclosure, and that consistency in itself creates a psychological barrier, because breaking 539 years of tradition is not just revealing a secret, it is betraying 14 generations of ancestors who protected that secret. It is destroying something that has defined your family longer than most nations have existed. The weight of that history is apparently more powerful than any external pressure. In 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Glamis Castle closed completely to visitors for 18 months. No tourists, no external staff, only the family and essential trusted servants. Some speculated on internet forums that this would be the moment for drone investigations or high-resolution satellite imagery, but Glamis is on extensive private property. Airspace directly over the castle, up to a certain altitude, is restricted for privacy reasons, and publicly available satellite images lack sufficient resolution to see internal architectural details. When the castle reopened in 2021, nothing had changed. The same tours, the same 12 rooms, the same closed West Wing, the secret intact. David McClure, the journalist who investigated Glamis in the 1990s, is now 72 years old. In a 2021 interview on a British History podcast, He was asked if he still thought about the Glamis mystery. His response was resigned but fascinated. "Of course I do. It is the only secret in my career that I could never penetrate. And I think it is because it is the last true secret of the British aristocracy. Everything else has been exposed. The financial scandals, the infidelities, the questionable origins of fortunes. But Glamis is different, because whatever they are hiding, they have collectively decided, for more than 500 years, that it is worth more than anything revelation could bring. And honestly, after all my investigation, I have come to respect that. I do not agree with it, but I respect it. There is part of me," he continued, "that hopes it is never revealed, because in a world where everything is knowable, where every secret eventually comes to light, there is something almost beautiful in the fact that the Leon family has achieved the impossible. They have kept a true secret. And when it is revealed, if it is revealed, the world will lose one of its last genuine mysteries. It is a curiously romantic sentiment for an investigative journalist, but perhaps it captures something important. The secret of Glamis persists not only because the family protects it, but because on some level we all want it to persist. We want to believe that there are still mysteries that cannot be solved by Google, drones, or DNA tests. We want to believe that some doors can remain closed, that some questions can go unanswered, that in the age of total information something can still be unknown, and as long as that belief persists, the secret of Glamis is protected not only by 5-meter thick stone walls, but by our collective desire for some mysteries to remain unsolved,